Maryam Henein,
I'm an investigative journalist.
We're here asking people about the coronavirus and what they think.
I'm here in the Sinai Desert. Come with me as I investigate.
What does all your other work have to do with Google?
In 2018, we were getting 500,000 unique visitors, and we suddenly saw the traffic go down, down, down. I wonder if Google has any links to Big Pharma.
Thank you so much for this, Mary, especially this film, Vanishing in the Bees.
Do they know something we don't about GMOs?
There's a confusion and blaming just Monsanto when it's really we need to look at Bayer and Syngenta.
These poisons aren't just killing bees, they're also killing beings.
I'm saying that this is the virus that didn't cry wolf. Are you afraid of coronavirus?
No.
Graphene oxide, that's what got me killed on Twitter. Banned from Amazon, Instacart, Airbnb, Chase's bank account. She gets really deep into stories, those where everyone isn't willing to go.
Maryam, you have been hot on the trail of Charles Lieber since this case became public.
I'm not a prostitute or a parrot.
Do not let them turn you into lab rats.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks so much for joining us. This is Daniel Estulin. Welcome to Estulin Media. Today, my guest, it's a special guest and it's a special show. She's the author. Her name is Maryam Henein, and she's the author of a book. I was going to talk about it right now. Remember the black guy murdered allegedly by the police, George Floyd? Well, she's an investigative journalist, best known for directing the award-winning film Vanishing the Bees. Also, she blew the whistle on the pharma company buyer. First of all, Maryam, thanks so much for joining us. How are you?
Daniel, thank you. I cite you in my book.
I know, thank you.
I am honored to be here and to have you actually read the book because I am proud of what I've created.
It's an amazing book. I mean, in a real world, not some strange parallel reality, you'd be getting your first Pulitzer Prize, but unfortunately we live in a different world where people get Pulitzer Prizes have nothing to do with reality. Right. All kinds of crazy claptrap. So you have PayPal, you have Amazon, GoFundMe, Airbnb that basically banned you. You've been, debanked by Chase Manhattan Bank. So what does that mean? Like, you want to go on holidays to, I don't know, to Honduras, and you go on Airbnb and they say, sorry, but you can't book a place with us. Is that how it works?
I'm not even on there. I had an account and they scrubbed it. Just like I woke up and it's like, are you like a moral hazard? Is that what basically it is? It seems like. I think it's because all 5'5" of me, I come at things as a journalist, as someone that reversed lupus, that had a chronic illness. I'm also an accredited functional health professional. So if I sit here and say, I'm 51, I reversed lupus, I learned how to walk again, you have something called an immune system. So it's mostly I got attacked for standing up for therapeutics. So for instance, in February and March 2020, the FDA, FTC, DOJ launched an operation called Quack Hack. So they went after people like me because I use the word prevention and I sell vitamin C and silver on honeycolony.com. So they shut me down. So I think people can tell when someone's authentic and they're not wearing masks on top of masks. So that I think is dangerous to empower someone. I don't know, that couple talking against the jib jab.
Well, there's a lot of material in your book. It's over 700 pages, a lot of documents, a lot of pictures, a lot of very interesting things. And the book, what it basically does is it takes you down the rabbit's hole. But what I want to do is, because again, there's so much, to make sense of. So I want to focus on the bigger issues to help us understand, the what's and the whys, because if we go down the pretty little things, we're gonna miss the big issue. So, we've been told, again, we're talking about George Floyd, the black guy, Minneapolis, Minnesota. We've been told by the mainstream media, by the government, that George Floyd was a black activist, good-natured, lovely person who was brutally murdered by white policemen who were envious of his purity and blackness, more or less. And of course, we've all read the headlines. Minneapolis police choke an unarmed, handcuffed black man to death. Black man George Floyd murdered in cold blood by white police officers, while others stood by looking on in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And so when you read these, when you read these harrowing headlines, you think to yourself, Jesus, what a dangerous place the United States of America is. What a poor guy just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. But again, once you read your book, and again, it's a mammoth book, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing it in print. Okay, why don't you tell us what really happened?
Well, I'll preface, you know that recently Derek Chauvin got shanked, right?
He was stabbed from what I understand, yeah.
By a FBI informant, a former FBI informant that used to be with the Mexican mafia.
Okay.
I'm just saying that because in light of the last few things that have occurred, up until then, as a real journalist, I can only bring the receipts and say, here, these are facts. And in the end of the book is only when I give you my opinion after 4-year investigation. So in reality,
the big story,
the big story is that the government, both sides, the Democrats, the Republicans, it's all two sides of the same coin. Minneapolis is a very corrupt state. And underneath it all, I believe, is a money laundering Mexican cartel operation that involves the complicity of the government. And I believe it was all an operation. However, they compartmentalize certain people. Not everybody knows the full scope of what's set to happen. And this was to usher in a color revolution and allowed us to go from virus to violence overnight.
So, go ahead. Sorry to interrupt you. Go ahead.
I was going to say, in presenting the movie, and that goes with the book, it's more to have a deeper conversation and to ask people, well, what do you think based on the receipts that I have brought forth? It's also the fact that these two people, George Floyd and Derek Chauvin, worked at the same club, a club that has ties to the Mexican cartel, El Nuevo Rodeo. However, that was completely removed from the narrative and never really revisited again.
Let's go to the trial for a second. Of all the things that were said in the trial, what are some of the things that surprised you most?
Well, one, that the prosecution literally removed the neck choke, the MRT, the maximum retraining technique, that they literally scrubbed it from the courtroom. This is the Derek Chauvin trial. Anyone that properly followed the trial, it was a sham show trial, and they left a lot of evidence. Of course, the jurors were all afraid for their lives. And the city itself, Hennepin, was turned into this dystopian police area. So there was a lot of, underlying intimidation, and they ruled that Derek was guilty in 20 minutes. However, also with just the camera perspective bias, the fact that his knee wasn't directly on his neck. It's Hollywood, it's the angle. And you have to consider, why is it that they focused on Darnella Fraser's footage?
Who is that? Who is Darnella Fraser?
Darnella Fraser is the one who won the Pulitzer Prize that belongs to me. So she was at the right place at the right time, and with her phone recorded one angle facing the cops, facing
the famous video we've all seen.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
It's the famous video that we've all seen. And Keith Ellison, the Attorney General, sat on the body-worn footage for about a little more than 2 months until it was revealed. But by then, the people at home who are watching TV that are believing their eyes, they all have concluded that Derek was guilty, even though it's very unlikely that Derek, you would look straight into a camera as you continue to put your knee on someone's neck area. Now, if they said to him, you've read the book, so for your audience, literally almost to the year before, in May 2019, George Floyd gets arrested. And the prosecution hides from the people that this was actually a sting operation. And when he gets arrested, he does the same crap that he says, my mama, I've been shot before. He swallows pills, and he tries to evade going to jail by saying he has a medical condition because he had swallowed pills. So he does the same thing. Now, the people don't know that this was a sting operation. But if they went to George and they said, you know that thing you did? Do it again. This time, say, I can't breathe. We're going to make you Rodney 2.0. And you're going to change the world. So if they know at about 10-minute mark that whatever drugs he swallowed, if he was supposed to go, like I say in my book, a la Sleeping Beauty, and wake up. In my movie, you'll see there's a part where he said, I'm scared as fuck when this goes off on me, man. When this goes off on me, man, what's going to go off on you, man?
So let me ask you this, or like when we were saying I can't breathe, like what was he referring to?
Well, in reality, I believe that it's part of the ritual of masking people. If you consider that Eric Garner also said, I can't breathe 11 times, and was also used by BLM as a rallying cry.
To most people who don't know who Eric Garner is, are you talking about a black man who was killed in New York some 10 years before that or something like that?
Yes, I don't know the details of Eric Garner other that he also said, I can't breathe. And if they and he was also represented by Benjamin Crump, which is the same social, well, he says that he's a civil rights attorney. He's really in an ambulance chasing shyster. But he was also, Eric Garner also had Benjamin Crump as a representative. And again, they recirculated. If you think about literally the next day, we're saying, I can't breathe. As in the United States, they brought in mask mandates, literally the next day in a lot of places. What you're
saying is that somehow all this stuff is related. So let me ask you this. The woman, I forgot her name, that was filming this video, just happened to be at the right place at the right time. Did you look into her background? Like, who is she? Was she just anyone, or was she someone who was placed there on the scene when she had links to the mafia, to the police, to did you look into her background at all?
I looked into her, her presence on Facebook. I tried to track her down and speak to her. I don't know that she has links to the mafia. However, I did establish that a year prior, she had posted on Facebook a big chocolate cake that said revolution. And when I looked at the day in which she posted, why March 17th, I think it was a United Nations holiday in the hopes of eradicating xenophobia and racism. And so whether this was, I believe, in motion, this false flag in order to usher in a color revolution.
Let me ask you something else. What did it say? Because from again, I haven't followed the case very closely. I couldn't really give a shit about some black guy being killed by the police or dying of fentanyl drugs in the United States. But from what I understand, if I'm not mistaken, he actually died of a drug overdose. And when he said I can't breathe, he was referring to the fact that because of the drug overdose, he couldn't breathe. Is that the case? Was that what was on Floyd's death certificate?
Actually, in his death certificate, if you look really closely, like I do, there's a little code and it's X42. And when I looked up the code, because I did a FOIA to get the death certificate, it's a multifactorial drug overdose. So officially, they bullied Andrew Baker, the medical examiner. However, the truth of the matter is that he took drugs. Now, did he say I can't breathe because he was told to say I can't breathe? Before Derek even arrived, Derek Chauvin arrived, before he was even on the floor, before anything he already had said. He said I can't breathe a total of 27 times. So it's very possible, that he had a panic attack if he's gobbling drugs and he's been in and out of jail and he doesn't want to go back into jail. And there's someone holding him down. It is strange that after it's clear that he's passed out. Derek is looking directly into Darnella Frazier, the woman with who recorded this on her cell phone. He's looking directly at her. Now, would anyone really do that in real life? You know, that's the thing, that once you deconstruct whether this would happen in real life, like if you, Daniel, if you got arrested and you at one point, George says, I need some water. And I always joke and I say, would you like a menu? Would you like to order some food? Like, you're being arrested, dude. You know, I wouldn't make a big to-do. You put your hands on the wheel and you cooperate with the police. So when I eventually saw the footage of him resisting, I was like, this is a grown man. This is a 46-year-old man who behaves this way.
Was he resisting already? Like when he was on the ground and Derek Chauvin had his knee on his back, which obviously wouldn't cause him to not to breathe. I don't remember George Floyd resisting, if I'm not mistaken.
He resists the 10 minutes before. You can see in my movie, there's a whole 10 minutes before he's walked across the street. And even the two people in the car, which is Shawanda Hill and Maurice Lester Hall, the woman says, George, stop resisting, literally. So that's why there's two scenes. It's like act 1, act 2. And they made sure for the public to not see act 1 until they had already formed a perception of what really has occurred.
There's something else you say in your book, which is quite interesting. You said Floyd's death was a pivotal first domino used to break down the United States of America. You said it was the spark that lit the fuse. The spark that lit the fuse towards what?
Towards a color revolution. So if this is a Marxist takeover where we're seeing more and more, you know, censorship, I mean, I can attest firsthand to censorship. And if we are also, in light of what happened with George Floyd, all the supposed protests that were really riots, where we're dismantling statues and we're rewriting our history. I mean, George Floyd has been likened to Jesus Christ. He's a modern Messiah.
Right.
So what happens is that we are glorifying criminals and we are imprisoning God-loving people, because there's a lot of people who are in jail, I know some personally, that have not done anything. So it's people they have fatigue, right? They don't want to deal with this story. Like you said, you don't give a shit. There's a George Floyd fatigue, but while people are not paying attention, someone like me comes along and gives you the truth. And also how many legislation and laws have been put in effect in regards to the duty to intervene, policing laws. So he definitely has had an impact. And one of, you see in my book that I established, like if I were to tell you, Daniel, who do you think organized the funerals for this guy, 4 funerals, would you automatically think it's
mammoth? I remember it was like, how many hundreds of cars were there at the funeral? I mean, that was insane. How much did that cost?
A lot of money. I don't know.
Let me tell you something. You mentioned my book, Tavistock Institute. In my book, the Tavistock Institute for Human Relations, I explained that back in 1945, John Rawlings Rees was the Grand Master of Psy-War, psychological war, counterinsurgency. In his book, he wrote a book. It's a very interesting book called "The Shaping of Psychiatry by War." And Rees called for the development of psychiatric, what he calls shock troops, in order to develop methods of political control based upon driving the majority of the human population towards psychosis through the procedure called programmed behavior modification. So let me ask you this. Is this what we're seeing with George Floyd? Programmed behavior modification? And how has this behavior been modified by the events of George Floyd?
I mean, definitely. I think I'm not familiar with Rees's term. I'm familiar with mass formation psychosis. And if a whole swath of people still today believe that this event with George Floyd occurred over race, they are being fooled. they are being manipulated, and they're making a decision based on a bunch of lies, because even Keith Ellison, the Attorney General, went on 60 Minutes and told the whole world this had nothing to do with race. So you would know better, because I haven't read Reese's. Like, do you think this is a mass formation psychosis, or
when we speak of psychological warfare, we're often speaking of ways to make the enemy afraid.
Yeah. Yes.
And in order to do this, we must understand the enemy's psyche, and that's what the elite have done so well during COVID. They understood how we think, what makes us love, what makes us hate, fight, run, resist. And so the enemy might be, it doesn't matter if it's foreign or domestic, it's irrelevant, an army of men or an enraged mass of workers. And in order to find an effective antidote, what Tavistock has done, they needed to understand how this enemy will react under stress. Will he fight harder or simply surrender? And that's what they need to have done with COVID. They've been watching us we too, but we're not as smart as they are. Will they start making errors and judgment, winning the war for the enemy, in a manner of speaking? Because again, in any conflict, the costliest mistakes of psychological warfare operations are always those made in ignorance of an enemy's mindset. That's what we don't know, and that's why we make mistakes. And so this applies a kind of a deep knowledge of human psychology by recent shock troops, a knowledge which is in itself is kind of black art. And because this is a war of perception, of world views.
Yes. As
you said, we're watching on television, we're seeing the police officer allegedly hurting, killing, destroying an innocent black man because someone took a video from a particular angle. And it's important that the psychologists and the psychiatrists and the sociologists and the anthropologists, these unidentified little gray men in flannel suits working for Tavistock, for the elite, they understand the impact of cultural modes of expression and how these worldviews are represented by them. Because one of the things I wanted to ask you is, when that happened, okay, talking of Marxist revolution, but let me ask you something else. How do Black Lives Matter? How does Antifa, how do they fit into this dialectic, into this equation? Because after that, they were right there, front and center.
Well, they're the mob. They activate the mob. You know, I don't know if this is in the book, but after watching an interview, there was a pilot that contacted me, and he said leading up before the riots/protests, things had just shut down, but they were still flying planes, and they were putting up the pilots in better hotels because some of them had shut down. So he was being put up in penthouse.
Are you talking about which event? 9/11?
No, I'm sorry. I'm talking about the lockdowns. After the lockdowns.
The COVID lockdowns. Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry. So after the lockdowns, but before the George Floyd event, a pilot was still flying, but he was being put up in great hotels. And he remarked in St. Paul and another state where the first 2 floors were full of thugs and looking like gang members. Now, if you recall, they released a lot of prisoners. And we wondered, why are they releasing these prisoners? I don't know, maybe you didn't know that, but
so I do remember, so they overwhelmed the police, not only in Minnesota, but in New York, yes, in Philadelphia, in Baltimore, in Detroit, in California.
Yes. But what if they recruited some of those prisoners, and what were they doing in like days before the riots broke out in these hotels? So if this was in motion and they mobilized Antifa and BLM in order to ruin the country, right? There was like $2 billion in damages, equaling more damage than Rodney King. So I think that's
1991, if I'm not mistaken, something like that. No.
For what?
Rodney King.
Rodney King. Yeah, it was before I came to the United States, so I'm not sure. 1994, like before 96, I missed it, but
the riots in South Central LA. Yeah, I remember.
it's akin to that, more damage than Rodney King. So your question as to, Antifa and BLM, Trump identified them as a domestic terrorists, and anyone who actually thinks these people are anti-fascism is incorrect. They're the mob. And we saw with George Floyd that mob rules, right? There was no fear of these super spreader events for social justice. It's ridiculous. They made allowances for this event in order to destroy a lot of the statues and therefore rewrite history.
Well, the mob, or like when you have a mob, it's basically works as a cohesive brain.
Yes.
There's a quote that I really liked in your book. Sam Cooper, he said that the thing about corruption is that the more widespread it is and the higher up it goes to the political establishment, the less people want to talk about it. I mean, how do you apply it to the events we're describing right now? I mean, you mentioned the jury. They didn't want to go, nobody had any questions. They weren't willing to, say, no, I don't see it this way. Is this what you mean?
I feel that, like, my movie has footage that's never before seen on the planet. And I was, as a journalist, as someone that was in Hollywood, that believed I was a Democrat or a liberal and was part of that world, wrote for the mainstream, worked for MSNBC, and then over the past 4 years, in part because I was going out. My boyfriend was the Google whistleblower, Zach Voorhees, and he was enmeshed or familiar with the conservatives. And so then I got to see the conservative world, and I felt at first that I was embraced. I was at the deadly insurrection. I ended up showing my footage to Rudy Giuliani. I witnessed the live action role play. I thought I was contributing to a investigation, but no, Rudy was using my footage for his show 2 years in a row. So why am I bringing this up? Because instead of being embraced by the right with my book or my movie, what happened is that The Fall of Minneapolis came out recently, probably, I believe, in response to my movie, because they want to hide it. So when you're really close to the truth and it doesn't fit the left or the right dialectic, then there's no room for the truth. And so I use that quote because there's lack of courage. You can see that, right? And
you mentioned something. You mentioned something else. When I think of George Floyd's murder, death, whatever you want to call it, in any intelligence operation, you have a lot of groups involved, because any intel operation costs a lot of money. Whether we're talking about 9/11, it doesn't matter.
right.
They're expensive, and so everybody, antes up, put some money into the general coffer, and they split the expenses. So I see this George Floyd thing as a kind of a multi-level operation. And so what are some of these objectives, and who are some of these invisible actors behind the scenes that we don't hear about, know anything about?
Yeah, my book is called Multi-Layered Operation.
Yes,
So
exactly.
it does serve many purposes. I mean, the people in the shadows, like, that's why I brought up the funeral. When you find out that the United States government organized the funerals, would they organize my funeral or your funeral? And you consider, like, I had to bury an uncle via Zoom. My mom couldn't go in and bury her sister and go to Ohio from Quebec.
Do you know how much it cost? Like, how much that funeral cost?
I
mean, it looked really expensive.
Millions and millions of dollars. This is all a laundering also operation, right? So they say Floyd Mayweather picked up the tab, but then there was all these GoFundMe groups. And if you think of a gold casket.
Yeah, that was over the top.
And a carriage. Like,
yes. So, I mean, this is obviously, I mean, in the world of intelligence, in the world of smoke and mirrors,
Yeah.
after when I signed the book for someone, I said, welcome to the world of smoke and mirrors. And a lot of people don't understand what it means. But it's a show, it's a big show. Okay, so there's invisible characters. They're pointing their finger, your nose, they're sticking your face into that. What are they telling us, really?
What are they telling us? You mean with this operation?
What they're telling us, what they're telling us with the operation, again, we can see it in his funeral. There's a message there. Okay, it's all a message. It's just how, whether people are able to decipher that message or not.
Well, I think there's many messages. Was this a cornerstone ritual? Was it a ritual? Even the 846, to symbolize 846, have people with their mask. 846 was the alleged time that Derek put his knee on the neck, only to find out that, oops, it wasn't 846, but 846 was also the exact moment that the North Tower was hit. So there's a lot of symbolism underneath it all. There's a whole chapter that I write about this theme of twins, and that, you could tell me with all your knowledge what you see is the underlying.
Let me tell you, when one can so easily manipulate the perception of reality, one eventually comes to the realization that truth, capital letter truth itself is a very malleable thing. So again, it was only natural. When you're talking about any kind of a secret operation, secret societies, you talk about the Masons in your book. It's only natural that the cultists and the spies, they would gravitate towards each other and would try to learn from each other. This control of reality, of the perception of reality, the creation of consensus reality.
Yes.
It's a very powerful political tool. It has been, but not now, since ancient times, since the ancient Greece, since ancient Egypt. When the proverbial sorcerers could, appear to create solar eclipses by simply knowing when one would occur, and accordingly, they would control the people's reality. And so to control and to manipulate the reality of the masses, whether it's 3,000 years ago or today, one uses what is known as psychological warfare. And it is but one step from, I'd say, from controlling a person's perception of reality to getting that person to act on it. And that was, again, that's when the people started acting on that reality. You had the riots, you had the Black Lives Matter, you had the Antifa. What else did we have? What did it have to do with Donald Trump? Anything at all? Was that also a way
Absolutely. It was
to hijack the presidency?
Absolutely. It was an election year. I mean, I've grown to believe that it's just all two sides of the same coin. And so this push-pull, like what we're going to see now, with the latest events, with Derek getting shanked, getting rejected from the Supreme Court, and knowing that Chief Arredondo, the former police chief, literally lied under oath, and it's now been true. So what I predict will happen is that we're going to see a shift, a stirring sympathy for Derek. And then it's again an election year. Let's see what happens if there is a habeas corpus petition and this trial, like regardless of whether you believe this is true, whether you think Derek was guilty, not guilty, we all have a constitutional right to a fair trial. This was not a fair trial. This was a joke. So because it's an election year, I predict that we're going to see more mayhem. They will use George to rile up the mob again, that still somehow didn't get the memo that this had nothing to do with race. And in the interim, the peoples are being manipulated. I'll share
about manipulation, white versus black narrative.
Yes, it will, but it's also a left Democrat versus Republican.
So the idea is to divide. You divide black,
Yes,
left,
yes,
black,
absolutely
black,
right.
white, Trump, anti-Trump, MAGA, anti-MAGA,
Yes.
abortion, anti-abortion. But another question: why Minnesota? Why Minneapolis? Why that and not any other state?
Well, when you look under the hood of Minneapolis, I call it Mordor. It's been called Murderopolis. And by coincidence, when I just said, let me just see if there's a drug corridor from Minneapolis to Texas to Mexico. So if there was a lot of shenanigans, and things locked down. And if you saw the show, if you've seen the show Ozarks, or you know about money laundering, you need your legitimate storefronts. And you need, what did they do? They destroyed everything. I mean, it's a good question as to why Minneapolis BLM has beginnings. It has a strong foothold in Minneapolis for many, many years. That it's a good question as to why Minneapolis.
Let me ask you something else. When we're talking about extremist movements in America, and right away you think of KKK, Ku Klux Klan. But again, we can also talk about Black Lives Matter and Antifa. Now, I know a lot of the, the lefty liberals think of Black Lives Matter and Antifa as, true blue revolutionaries, but they're not. They're extremists, aren't they? Yeah,
absolutely. They are fascists. They are what they claim to be standing against is what they actually are. And I think this mob mentality, I was going to give you an example. Early on in the pandemic, I was in the jungle. I was in Costa Rica, but then I went back to San Francisco, and I went to cover as a journalist a BLM, Black Lives Matter, anti-police, transgender. So I went there, and there's all these young people, and they're screaming at the cops. They're outside of the police station. The cops are just standing there. And I said to these girls, I said, don't you realize that you're doing the same shit that you're trying to avoid? You are berating a whole group of people, but you do not know them individually. And then they looked at me and they said, whose side are you on? And I said, I'm on the side of truth. I'm independent, because they see me, they're Black, I'm brown. So they didn't know what to do with me. And then I said, I made a film on bees. I was trying to connect with them. And they said, they all actually, 2 or 3 said in the same time, which was, wow. They said, oh, you don't care about humans, you care about bees. And then I wasn't wearing a mask. And then they said, you're not wearing a mask. And they started coughing in my face. My point of bringing this up is these people were void of any spirit. They were kind of zombies. And I was looking at one of the girls, and she's like, why are you looking at me like that? I'm like, I'm trying to connect with you, honey. I'm trying to reach your heart. And she got offended. So I've noticed some type of like you said, it's a mob. It's like a hive mind
mentality. Yeah,
it's a hive mind, and there's no more individualism, right? And that is part of the design here in this greater picture of removing our individuality, right? You think you're an individual because you have your hair is purple. You're a cookie cutter of everybody else. They don't want critical thinking. They don't want someone to stand up and say, I'm not doing what everybody else is doing. I'm my own person. Right?
Let me ask you something else. Today, again, when did George Floyd's murder happen? In 2020, no? Yeah. So do people actually believe that George Floyd was savagely murdered, and that his death inspired a readiness for collective action against systemic racism? Or do they actually say, well, maybe that's, what we've been told is a crock of shit and the actual story is quite different? Or do they believe that? Has that been encrusted in their subconscious?
Well, last I checked, when I was looking for an editor, Daniel, because I made an award-winning film, I got a good editor. I was shopping it around, and he was a white guy, and I'm the brown girl. And he saw the footage. He goes, I just finished crying, and I want to know, I need to go in like same Spanish. And then he said, I'm not going to do this film because it's for ethical reasons, like I'm being unethical. So I don't know how anyone can still believe that this was a racist. It depends, who are we asking? Are you asking someone on the left? Are you asking someone on the right?
Well, mainstream media, they told us a story. But as with any story, not all of the pieces fit the bill, obviously. So when you're constructing a dialectic, if you're the mainstream media, if you're the elite, if you're the controllers, if you're whatever you want to call these people, what pieces of this, puzzle, you just say, we better hide it, censor it, eliminate it to fit the narratives? Yeah. What pieces, because there's a lot of that in your book, which is, again, it's an amazing book. And you can tell us at the end of the interview where we can buy it and so on and so forth. But so what pieces were removed to make the narrative fit the bill?
Well, for one, that these two guys worked at the same club. They worked at the same business, and then the notion that they didn't know each other, and there was one man that came forth and said that they did know each other. And
That doesn't quite fit, yeah.
Sorry, it doesn't quite fit.
Right.
Also, no one else has brought light to Cup Foods. That is a Arab Palestinians, doesn't fit within the the black-white narrative. Cut. So whatever didn't fit, they cut out of the story. And I cite Joel Gilbert, who directed the film, the Trayvon Martin hoax, who was central in guiding me. And he said it's the same thing here, whatever didn't fit. So those are two examples. Like, the truth is, the epicenter of this event started at Cup Foods. The truth is, there's a very good possibility that the person who who told them to call 911 is an informant. So they also they lied about the fact that there was an owner at the store. They said that there was no one, and that this employee, who's from South Africa, just took it upon himself to call 911. Then they changed the story. So there's a lot of things that they cut out. They cut out the fact, let's say, for instance, that Thomas Lane literally goes into the ambulance and is seen doing chest compressions. But if you think, Daniel, he got arrested for not doing enough. And this is the first time that this occurs. They changed policing, not only in Minneapolis, they've changed it in many states. And like they said, that this legislation, this duty to intervene. So if you are on the second day of your job, third day of your job, and you have a boss, an FTO, a field training officer, you're now expected to push him out of the way and to intervene into the scenario. So I'm trying to think of all, the other things that they conveniently cut out because it didn't fit into. Okay, so for instance, it's not George's car. They were going to a barbecue. They lied. The media was told that all three coincidentally ran into one another. I have footage that shows that Maurice and George arrived together, and they knew that Shawanda was coming. They also cut out the drugs, right? They cut out the drugs.
They cut out the drugs because George Floyd had to, you had to show him as this pristine, clean, honest victim, Boy Scout. Let me ask something else. Do you think George Floyd, I mean, if he was sacrificial lamb in this operation, do you think he knew that he was going to die? Or needless to say, most of the time, the victim doesn't know that he's going to die, because most people say, I'm not particularly happy about that scenario. So how much of what actually transpired did George Floyd know about?
I believe that he thought he was going to wake up, and that some people knew that he wasn't going to, that he was going to die. I don't think that he knew. I do think that he was an informant. And many of these informants, after interviewing a DEA investigator, are unwitting. They don't even know that they're being used in an operation. I mean, the question I get over and over again is, is George really dead? But after purchasing autopsy pictures.
So you do have autopsy pictures? Yeah.
And one of them is in the book. And it's a gruesome, I personally don't think that he's still alive. I would say that he wasn't supposed to die, but that he did. Possibly there's some people in the operation that knew. If you think about the Floyd family, if you think that they never went to pick up his belongings at the house that he lived in, if you think of Maurice Lester Hall, who was with George that day, they never spoke to the two people that were with him to get a sense. So Maurice, I did an exclusive 2-hour interview, and he said, regardless of what you think of me, wouldn't you want to speak to the person that spent their last hours with your loved one? And my answer is yes. So when for instance, I interviewed the roommates, one of the roommates, Teresa, that lived with George. So when I said, so Teresa, did you meet the family? And she said, no, because there was celebrities there. And I said, do you think that Channing Tatum took it out of the goodness of his heart to go into a funeral? Do you think he got money? Because Hollywood was closed. And okay, I'll wear a little face diaper and I'll go and I'll stand for George Floyd. Like, think about it. This was a gig. This was a gig.
So let me ask you one last question. We are running out of time, unfortunately. Okay. I can for another hour. You start your book almost immediately. You ask a very interesting question, and I want to kind of end it on that question. You mentioned it earlier. What do George Floyd, money laundering, the Bolshevik Revolution, Tavistock Institute, Freemasons, and Sinaloa cartel have in common?
They all are corrupt and don't care about the United States of America.
And how is it related to George?
Why? Well, you know, in this color revolution, to take down America, because America does have a constitution, even though I'd argue it's not really our constitutional rights aren't being upheld, but knowing that once you take down America, it's a lot easier to usher in this new world order that is very much underway. I mean, how would you answer that question?
No, it's fair enough. It makes sense. Listen, before we go, how can we follow your work? Where can we find you? And most importantly, where can we find your book and your film?
Thank you. So I provided links. If people can go down to the link, but people can go to maryamhenein.com and they can pre-order the book.
It's spelled MaryamHenein.
Yes,
Okay.
.com. You can follow me on Twitter. My movie, I'm not even able to sell my own movie, but you can go to My Movies Plus. It's called The Real Timeline, and it's an hour long, and you will see footage that you've never seen before. What I did was I just simply put all the footage from the government that I purchased in chronological order with an amazing editor, Sean Hibbler. So yeah, you can also follow my work on Substack. It's maryamhenein.substack.com. That's where I've written in length about John Tursak, the FBI informant, Mexican mafia member that supposedly shanked Derek 22 times.
In prison. So one final question. Your book, when is it coming out?
The book is hopefully the aim is for the 4th year anniversary of George Floyd. So May 25th, 2024.
Who is the publisher?
The publisher is Logosofia, and they are the only ones that showed courage to publish this book.
It's not, yeah, it's that's what happens when you go against the flow and against the mainstream media gravitas. But anyway, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you. And I cite you, Daniel, in my book. So I hope
I'm very grateful. Thank you very much. And I loved your book, and we're going to get this out in Spanish and English, and a lot of people will see it. Take care.
Thank you.
See you later. Bye.
Something has prompted you to embark on a journey toward a healthier you. Perhaps it was a health scare, or the chemicals you want to avoid in conventional foods, or maybe you simply want more energy. But with so many different types of diets, lifestyle disciplines, pricey supplements that claim they antioxidize your life, and vendors that are more interested in their bottom line, who can you really trust? Honey Colony brings people together who want to optimize their health through trustworthy information and top-notch products. We bring together quality vendors, renowned nutritional experts, and health-conscious people. Learn, share, and shop health.